This episode of the New Medical Nomads podcast is brought to you by Nomadicare. Now, personally, I love Nomadicare. I've used Nomadicare, and I recommend the company to all new travelers. What Nomadicare does is it takes the fear out of getting set up with a bad recruiter, which is the biggest fear that you have jumping into this journey. So they sit down, they interview recruiters, they vet them, get them on a list, and then provide them to you as a free service, as a free recruiter matchmaking service in order to get you started on your journey. Now, usually you only get 2 recruiters going through Nomadicare, but being a listener of the show, you can get 3. So this is how it's going to work. You go to nomadicare.com/Dylan. You will get set up with 3 recruiters to be on your dream team, as well as a guide to get you started on your journey.
The second sponsor of the show is TravCon, the Travelers Conference. I'm super excited to announce them as a sponsor of the show. TravCon was there for me before I got started as a medical nomad, and now I'm actually involved with the planning of the event. So super aligned, super congruent. I've been promoting them before they were even a sponsor, and so I'm excited to have them on. So there are 3 main reasons that you should go to TravCon this year. Number 1, value. This is the cheapest conference to go to as a medical professional, and also the only place that I've ever felt like royalty when you're walking in and all these staffing agencies and all these recruiters want to talk to you, and you're bumping elbows with these travelers and they're interested about your story, about where you're coming from and what you're doing. And it's overall just a really good, feel-good event. Number 2 is education and growth. So this conference was founded on the realization that there's a lot to know to be a medical traveler, to be a medical nomad. And so this is where you go to get the most updated tax information. This is where you go for those really niche specific questions on what's it like to travel in an RV and what's it like to travel to Hawaii. And then 3rd, community. This is where a lot of my traveler friends that are very near and dear to my heart right now, this is where we met. So this is where the relationship sparked. It's also one of the only places that you get to go to and see the leaders and meet the leaders of the industry, both on the staffing agency side and on the traveler side, and also get to meet your recruiters face-to-face that you've been working with. So TravCon is always in September every year. TravCon is also always in Las Vegas. The link is going to be in the show notes for you to get your ticket. I'll be at TravCon. All my friends will be at TravCon. I hope to see you there.
Hey Nomads, this is Dylan coming at you talking about South America. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the New Medical Nomads podcast. I am your host, Dr. Dylan Collier, and this is the second part about preparing for my trip to South America. First part was what I did. Second part is going to be what I wish I would have done. And so this is going to be a shorter episode of talking about what I wish I would have done specifically for South America. And I'm looking through my notes here. There's one in here that if you're kind of listening, that's going to be pretty general to other areas. It was specifically be the second thing that I talk about, but most of this is going to be very specific to South America itself. But again, if you're just jumping into the kind of the travel game, these episodes are going to be more like inspirational of what all you can do with this potential freedom when you have exponential time off between contracts and kind of make this life what you want it to be. And so for me, I go to other countries, I spend time in other cultures, and truly changes your views on the world, especially kind of going through this whole quarantine with COVID-19 and seeing how Peru handled it, seeing how devastating it has been for Peru even before I left, of what all was going on. And so when you're having those hard situations, it really kind of just leaves an imprint on you for the rest of your life. And that's for sure going to be a story that I will hold on and kind of be telling my grandchildren, and sitting around the living room, crisscross applesauce, I think is what they call it now. But yeah, so I think I got 4 points here of things I wish I would have done differently, specifically for South America. Going into South America, specifically Colombia, I was nervous. I talked about this before, but I was around my family. I'm not going to make like excuses. I was just nervous. Like, you have all these stories of South America. If you look up like the top, 15 deadliest cities in the world, all but one are like Central and South America. And so I was pretty nervous. I was also nervous because I knew that with South America, there was going to be a higher chance of a language barrier than I experienced in Asia. And so, of course, I got there. I wasn't sure if I was going to like South America. It ended up being my favorite place, my favorite trip thus far. It's probably going to be the first continent I go back to after I achieve my goal of living on all continents before I turn 30. And Medellin ended up being the first city where I felt like, oh, this could be a future home. So all of that was unwarranted, all of that fear. But specifically because of the language barrier, I was nervous. And I will say the language barrier was even worse than I thought it was going to be. I thought I could get by with just my phone. I quickly realized that when I got there, I didn't feel comfortable getting out of the touristy areas. I didn't feel comfortable, just hopping on the tram or on the subway and just going somewhere and getting off like I would have in Asia. So what ended up happening is that I took probably 4 weeks of Spanish, like pretty intense, like 6 hours a day. One, because I wanted to be more comfortable. I was so upset that I was kind of like stuck in these more touristy areas. I wanted to get out and explore more. And so for Colombia, I just stayed in Medellin that whole time. Again, on a previous episode, I kind of talk about why. But with Colombia, so many nice places to go. It's only like 3-hour flight from Florida. Like, it's just absolutely amazing. But I stayed in Medellin a lot of the times because I didn't know like how traveling around was going to work. With me not knowing, hopping on a bus, hopping on a colectivo was so much easier once I learned some Spanish. So it took about 4 weeks, about 6 hours a day. It was pretty intensive. Made some really good friends at this Spanish school called Blink. And if I could go back, I would definitely start Spanish lessons sooner. I would have felt a lot more confident. I would have been able to leave those like touristy areas, and would have felt more confident with talking with people, with kind of like finding out where things are. And then the whole negotiation with, or not negotiation, but the whole purchase, like process of buying like SIM cards was a lot easier once I knew some Spanish. And so I'm going to put in the show notes, the Blake Spanish School. They, with everything going on, they were already in the process of launching online. I was their first student, their first online student, because I wanted to continue this as I went forward. And in the 3 months that I was in South America, I went from zero Spanish to functional Spanish. I wouldn't call it fluent, but I can like struggle through a conversation. And it's very interesting, the different like sticking points of like just like learning Spanish in general. Much harder than I thought it was going to be. Eventually I knew like what I wanted to say, but I just couldn't understand persons when they were speaking. So they'd say a word like 3 times. I'm like, what is that? And I'd have them write it down. I was like, oh, I know that word. And so just like the different types of like kind of barriers to move on to the next step was really, really interesting. So yeah, I would have definitely done online Spanish school. They didn't have it before I went for this specific school, but I love this school and the mission behind it and the owner, which I'm going to have on the show eventually, probably after this episode, whenever I get a hold of them. But definitely consider doing Spanish. I downloaded Duolingo. I ended up not doing as much as I should have, but Duolingo is good for repetition. It doesn't really teach you the rules. I feel like once you know the rules, Duolingo becomes a lot easier, and because you can then just do the repetition after that. But definitely check out Spanish lessons before. Even if you're only going to be there like 2 weeks, say it's a short international trip, specifically this school, I know other schools do it as well, like just have like a crash course on like things to know how to say help me, know how to, when you're doing like exchanges for cash, like that was a big sticking point for me of understanding like how much they were asking for when you're trying to bargain for, fruit or food or a shirt or whatever it might be. That got hard. So they'll teach you like numbers, currency exchange, and just some basic, like, where are you from? How are you? Los Estados Unidos. Like having those conversations that will make it a lot easier. So even if you're only going for 2 weeks, there's like some crash course. Like, I'm pretty sure you can get that, like learn that in 3 to 4 hours, repetition it through Duolingo, repetition it with friends, and then you'll at least be able to understand a little bit, kind of just those first initial salutations and those first initial like currency exchanges when you get there. So that was probably the biggest thing. I didn't realize, I knew that language barrier was going to be an issue. I didn't realize how big of a difference it was going to be between Asia. Asia, you don't have to worry about it. Like Thailand, Indonesia, like it's fine. South America, hardly anybody spoke Spanish, or sorry, hardly anybody spoke English, especially going on buses from Colombia to Ecuador, Peru. I couldn't imagine going through that and not knowing any Spanish whatsoever. People do it. When we got stuck in Machu Picchu, there's a big group there, and most people don't know Spanish, and so they're just kind of like in the dark about a lot of things. And I highly recommend it. I'm sure there are people out there doing it, not knowing Spanish and traveling around South America, but would make your life much easier if you could speak the language. So number 2, this is the item that would be kind of general for a lot of other countries, specifically talking about international driver's licenses. This is something I learned while I was in Asia and wish I would have known for Asia. The reason I ended up getting it, the reason I'm wishing that I wouldn't have got it, is that in South America, they don't have places for you to go like rent a scooter or rent a motorcycle. And so it's not that big of a deal. You would just use Uber, or you would use Cabify, or Beat. Beat is, I think Beat is like its own individual company. It's not owned by Uber or Lyft, but that's like the South American version for Uber or for Lyft. And so when you have those apps, you can just like drop a pin, have them pick you up. It's pretty cheap. Public transportation is always cheaper, but a lot of times you have to walk like pretty far distance, and then you have to be pretty savvy with like where you're going, probably know the language a little bit, on where to get off, those sort of things, especially in a collectivo where they just like often these buses, especially in where were we? Ecuador, they just drop you off wherever. It's not really like a bus station. In some of these smaller areas, they just like drop you off at a corner. You're like, okay, here we are. So with international driver's license, wasn't really necessary for South America. Didn't rent anything, didn't drive anything. So I think it's only good for a year, maybe 2 years. So probably could have saved some cash. I think it's only like $40, $60. When getting an international driver's license, funny enough, it's not through the DMV, it's through AAA. So you find a local AAA that can get you the international driver's license. Once I went to Thailand, however, in Indonesia, it's very common for you to rent a scooter to get around. And so there's a lot more pushback on companies like Uber and Lyft, and they have their own like special type of app specifically for Thailand. However, it's owned by Uber. And so there's a lot more pushback. You have to be careful with like jumping in cars because it is illegal. Some places in South America as well, you have to like get into the passenger side seat. Otherwise cops will stop them, and then they take a big risk with that for like minimal amount of money. So I definitely tip my drivers. I typically don't tip in other avenues, but when coming into a culture, like if I'm getting waited on, some places like expect tip. And if it's like a nice like waiter setting, I'll definitely tip. But for like bars, I don't really tip. I just pay. And then, but however, for using Uber-like apps, they're taking a huge risk. So I make sure to tip them pretty well for using them. And so in Thailand, there's a lot more pushback. In Indonesia, there's a lot more pushback on that. You have to be really careful. Taxi drivers will actually like yell at you and call you out, especially if it's like a woman driver and like a solo woman, like traveler jumping into the car. They're more likely to like cause a scene, the persons around you. And so there's a pretty big fight against it. There's like signs everywhere saying you not to use it. So buying scooters is much more readily available in Thailand and Indonesia. The international driver's license allows you to do so. Make sure you wear a helmet. But if you don't have your international driver's license, the cops are going to stop you at some point, and then you have basically them trying to get a bribe from you. It's very, very common. They're going to threaten to take you to jail, and then, or you can pay like what, $300 and some ridiculous amount. And so then it comes to a part of you like, oh, so sorry, I only have 50 US and blah, blah, blah. And you go back and forth. And then eventually they're fine with like accepting, $50 US instead of, hundreds of dollars to make sure that you're not getting jail time for driving without a license. So international driver's license, really big deal when you're going to Asia. Not a big deal for South America. I don't know how it would have been in Argentina. Argentina, a lot more ground to cover. And I've heard Argentina, the preferred way to get around is actually hitchhiking. So I was pretty excited about that. Ended up not making it. So I'm sure there'll be another episode whenever I get to return and kind of continue that trip before all this massive lockdown started. Third thing I wish I would have brought, specifically because I was using a lot of bus transportation, going from Colombia by bus to Ecuador, going from Ecuador by bus to Peru. Giant trash bags for me to put my bags in. A lot of buses don't allow you to carry your big bag up on buses, and so they make you store them underneath. This was actually something told to me by the owner of that Blink Spanish school, that specifically in Colombia, they used to have a bad issue. I think they still have a bad issue of drivers teaming up with persons that once all the kind of luggage was inside the bus, the drivers would like wave somebody over. That person would come, take a couple bags, run off, and then they close it. You go to the next town, you get out of the bus, and then your stuff's not there. You didn't realize it. So I always sat next to where my luggage was, next to the window seat, just so I could watch, and specifically covered it up in a black trash bag. You'll start out with a new black trash bag. Over time, it'll get dusty. It'll get kind of like, it'll start looking like kind of grimy, which is what you want, because people can pretty much like point out what types of bags that travelers are using, and they'll target them. I never had any issues with it. I was pretty like stickler about it, about having like the trash bag covering it. Once it started having some holes in it, looked a little bit better. Jess and I would also, because we were traveling in a duo, I would take that giant bike chain. It's not really a chain, it was more like a bike wire, and I would lock them together. So together, like they're pretty like not hard to carry, but awkward to carry. So if I saw anybody leaving with our two bags, like I'm pretty sure I could have caught them. And so that was something that I wish I would have known before getting there, because I did use the bus a couple times before I was able to find a hostel with a big black trash bag that fit my bag. I ended up finding one that just barely fit it, which was perfect. And just, it didn't quite cover the bottom, so I made sure the bottom would face like the back of the bus. So if somebody was looking for like, a traveler bag, they would see a trash bag, not go for mine, and maybe go for the person's next to me. And so that was a really good tip. And I'm pretty sure that would be a big reason why my stuff wasn't targeted. Never had up until now. I haven't had any issues yet with my stuff being stolen. And again, my theory is like, I just don't want them to have an easy access to my stuff. So I want to make it tougher. I want it to, they'll need a knife to cut it open, or if they're going to like walk off with it, they're going to have to carry two bags instead of one, sort of thing. And then going back to that bag that I bought, it was really, really nice because some bags come with a large bag and then a smaller bag that kind of attaches to the front. This specific bag, then I'll have it in the show notes for both of these episodes, had some straps on the outside, so you could really strap it down and make it tiny, which is good when you're on a plane and you're trying to sneak it on as a carry-on and not luggage, so you can avoid a fee. Or you can loosen them up, and then I can throw my waterproof backpack on there with all my tech stuff, allow it to like hook up, And now I just have one giant backpack with like everything in it. And it was pretty good. I did, max like 3-4 miles walking with it. Was fine. Was a little sore, so I wouldn't do like a 7-mile hike with it per se. You would want a real backpack for that, but that bag I'm really, really happy with for that purchase. And then the last thing that I would have wished that I did for preparing for South America, I knew about this option for the cell phone SIM cards. However, I thought I would be smart and more financially savvy, just getting to those countries, have that unlocked phone, insert that SIM card when I arrived, and then be good to go. I knew that cell phone towers in Colombia might not work in Argentina, so I thought, I'll just get a SIM card in Colombia. I'll be good at least until I get to Argentina, and then if I need to, I'll get another SIM card. However, because of going through the country borders, I later found out I would have had to, or I did have to buy a SIM card after crossing the border for every single country. Probably would have been better for Argentina, like a one and done type of thing, because it's so large. But this would have saved a lot of headaches, which I kind of spelled out in the last episode, of dealing with these kiosk persons when you're not really, because sometimes that's all that was available, especially in northern Peru. They don't have like a cell phone store that you can go to. They don't even have bus stations, which we'll talk about on a later episode, but sometimes it's all you got. And so you're taking a risk. And I got burned a couple times because of it. I had to buy multiple SIM cards in some countries because what I bought wasn't what I intended to purchase, because I got scammed. And so definitely Google Fi is what I would have done. Google Fi, you still have to have an unlocked phone, and you basically put this in. It's a little more pricey. And again, I don't want to use the word pricey because it's still way cheaper than going through like your AT&T or your Verizon like travel plan, which is only for like emergency uses. You can't really use it for like internet and stuff. Otherwise, you're going to have a massive bill. But Google Fi can run off of any cell tower. The reason I didn't go with it, one, it was a little more pricey than just going with the straight SIM cards in the country. But now knowing the headache that comes along with that, I definitely would have went with Google Fi. Number two, I didn't see how well it was going to work in Argentina. They have like a map that you can look at for the towers that it works with, and Argentina was pretty blank. But the thing about Google Fi is that you can do it month to month. If you get to an area and you're realizing, it's like Google Fi is not going to work, Google Fi is not going to work in this country as well as I thought, you can then go through that hassle and get that other SIM card for super cheap. Or if you're going to stay there for 30 days and, you want to turn that off to save, whatever it might be, $20-$30 and buy a $7 SIM card, which is kind of like pretty much what they cost. Like, I think the most I spent was like $10 on these SIM cards to like have internet and cell phone service during my whole time there. I usually got like the 30-day plan when I was getting all the different SIM cards and wasn't getting scammed. But the Google Fi, you can easily turn it on and off. It's really cheap compared to your travel plans. It's a little more money compared to just getting the SIM cards directly at that country. But you also get to cross borders and you have a way to communicate. You have a way to see the maps of where you're going. You don't have to run around the airport to try and find a SIM card if it's not there. If it's not there, you're not out service for 3 days while you're trying to figure it out. It's definitely the more convenient option, and I wish I would have went with Google Fi. When I return, Google Fi is definitely what I'm going to use. Again, if I get to a country, if I get to Argentina, I realize it's not going to work, I'll just get the other SIM card. Like, I've been through that before. It's fine. You will get through it. Worst case scenario, you go to a kiosk guy and he scams you and you're out $10, and you just, hopefully the next person doesn't scam you as well. And it's really not the end of the world. But those were the main 4 things I wish I would have done for this trip. Again, I learned a lot going through that Asia trip. A lot of like financial hacks, like money savvy, money smart decisions compared to the previous trip that I did with England. And these were the 4 things that I wish I would have done differently for preparing for South America. But if you guys are looking for the next episode on the New Medical Nomads podcast, you can go to the New Medical Nomads podcast Facebook page for the official launches. If you're wanting the early access to these episodes, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes is where it's at. You can also find all these episodes on newmedicalnomads.com with all the show notes. So be sure to check it out there. And thank you guys for all the shares, all the comments on the likes, all the winky faces. All of that engagement helps more people to see this, which allows us to help more people, which is the whole point of this show. But everybody, have safe adventures. Hope you all are doing well, and everybody have safe travels.